Lightway.
Welcome to the session of Sons of Issachar. I'm joined by my brother Scott Lockwood, and we're joined today by a very special guest, and her name is Ainsley Lockwood, my niece. She was homeschooled. She played soccer throughout college. She's now an assistant soccer coach at a small college. She hobbies in music. She was selected to attend Glenn Beck and David Barton Constitutional Heritage Camp in Dallas, Texas. She was captain of the soccer team for 3 years, all-freshman conference team MVP. She also received the George Benson Leadership Award for her college graduating year for grades and leadership, and, the most important thing, character. She was a scholar athlete for 4 years straight, Alpha Chi National Business Fraternity, grad assistant program recipient for the MBA, numerous high school athletic rewards. She also did an internship at regional accounting firms, and she hobbies in music. She is absolutely a great woman, and she is on the program with us today, and we're just so happy that she's joined us. So welcome, Ainsley, also.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, you know what? We were thinking about, Scott and I were talking about this particular episode of the Sons of Issachar, and we were thinking about the home and discipline in the home, and now we're going to talk about why Johnny can't behave. And I want to say this as we begin. You know what? My brother Scott Lockwood has, in my view, the greatest family, just a great family, Christian family, 3 girls in the family, and actually 4 with counting his wife, and every one of them are great Christian, moral characters, upstanding in every way. All of them love their families, they love their parents, they love each other, they love the extended family, and it's just a refreshing family to see this after you hear so many stories about people saying, well, we can't seem to keep our children in control. We can't seem to keep our children faithful to God, and the world gets them, and you know the story. Well, that's why Johnny can't behave, but that's not the case in the family that I'm looking at on this camera, and that is Scott Lockwood and Ainsley Lockwood. So let's just start off by pointing out a couple of things here. Number one, what the Bible has to say, where we're going in this program, what the Bible has to say about discipline of a family. That doesn't mean just harsh discipline. It means loving discipline. And also what the reality is in the world, and there is a vast difference. Not only that, but in Christian families, that is, in families who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, I hear all the time people dismissing the concept of having any kind of discipline in the home or control of children. So I was reading a book by Cal Thomas not long ago, and he called it The AIDS Epidemic, that is, Acquired Integrity Deficiency Syndrome, lack of direction in the home. And so step number one that we should have is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The training for this kind of wisdom is in the home. With that, I'm going to let my brother Scott Lockwood and Ainsley take off where they want to go on this one.
Well, I appreciate that, Bill. First, I'd be the first to admit that I made, a whole lot of mistakes, and I feel like, I was just blessed with great children. But, there is something to be said for, it's purposeful parenting. I think a lot of people just kind of take on their role and feel like they're just trying to survive it rather than trying to look out ahead and be purposeful about it. I do know that, there's a structure in the home. There needs to be constraints. There needs to be these lines and standards of behavior, and there ought to be consequences for them. But the first thing that's so important, it seems, is that, the children's first concept of God is the father in the home. And so with that's the kind of gravity you should take on parenting, thinking about that's really their first introduction, and how you come across is going to affect them for years to come about how they think about God and how they think about Jesus. And so that's very sobering to think about itself. But we did everything that we could to try to build a loving home, but one that was very structured. And I will say this from the very beginning: quit listening to your neighbors in society, and unfortunately, quit listening to the people in the church that keep coming down. I'm telling you what, our culture is inundating the church and giving us ideas about everything from dating, how to raise children, how not to discipline, free ranging their children, and called gentle parenting. All of this has invaded the church. Get back to the Bible, regardless of how you feel about it. Get back to the Bible and understand what God says about discipline. When he talks about discipline, he's talking about the rod across the back. Well, we're not going to do the rod across the back, but I heard two psychologists once at Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs. They tried to explain away that, well, this doesn't necessarily mean corporal punishment. Well, it doesn't mean that you have to use corporal punishment in all cases. But it also means that it was absolutely certified and ratified by God. It's God Himself talking about the chastening, and it is a painful discipline process. It is that's the way He chastened Israel. And you've got a choice. You either love your son and you chasten him, or you don't love him, and then He would call him an illegitimate son because you don't discipline him. And so don't be afraid of discipline. Now we find out people like, Jocko, that everybody follows on podcasts, the ex-Navy SEAL, very popular, very interesting individual. He's written a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And it's like a lightning bolt across across the society. Everybody's like, whoa, discipline equals freedom. Well, guess what? If you go back to the Bible, you would understand that. And that even our founding fathers understood that, right, Bill? I mean, it's either you're constrained by the Bible, a force from within, or you're going to be asking for the bayonet, or in other words, a very strong state that would have to come in and take that role up. But I'll let Ainsley talk about some of this as well, because she's seen the other side. She went to college and started playing on soccer and found out that a lot of people don't even have any clue about discipline, self-discipline, or the constraints that are put on them, or that there should be consequences if you do test that line, which invariably everybody will test. And we find that out not only in the home, but also in organizations that I was a part of, like in the Air Force. I'll say this quickly too before I hand it over. When you put down these parameters of an organization, you say, well, here's the standard. First of all, make sure that everybody understands what that is. This is the level that we expect. This is what's acceptable. This is what's not. Don't make them guess. Let them know what it is. But then there's this popular thing that says, you got to punish in private, but you praise in public. Well, there's a lot to be said for that, to bring somebody along and encourage them. But there's a lot to be said for the public stocks in the middle of the city square. That's what we're missing today for a number of reasons. And one of those things is sometimes when 80%, at least in yesteryear, 80% of your organization was rule followers. But there's 20% that are kind of like, I'll kind of go with the flow, but I'm not, not too much of a rule follower. But there's about 2 or 3% they're like, no, I'm going to test you. I'm going to test you every chance I can. I don't stand with this organization. I'm not happy unless everybody else is unhappy. I'm going to sow the seeds of dissension, even in the church. That's why God keeps talking about unity and in the organization. And so then it would come to my attention and people would say, well, what are you going to do? Maybe you take them aside, do this and do that. You make an example out of them, and there's a reason for it. It has to be calculated. You can't just blow your cover, but you do it for a reason. It's like, nope, there's a lot of people that want to know where the line is, and they know. I remember one time we had an incident where something happened, and I went to a superior, and that individual said, well, we're handling it. I said, we're not handling it if I don't know what you're doing. We're not handling it if the rest of the unit doesn't know what you're doing. And all they know is that dirty deed was done. And once that's out and it's a public thing, you need to handle it that way so that they see the consequences. Don't leave them guessing, well, I guess the commander so-and-so is handling it. No, that's not good enough. They need to be able to see what's done And then that other 20% gets sucked in really good, and you can start building a unit. And that's
Yeah.
important. Conformity, discipline, character, those kind of things to build the team and build the unit. And of course, people would come to me and say, "Well, where did you learn all this? What book did you learn it?" And I just tell them, I said, "Well, I was a father. Everything I used in the Air Force, I used with my kids at home, and vice versa. It was just that's what fatherhood is." But anyway, I'm going to
You
hand it over
know,
to Ainsley.
you know what I want to ask my hero Ainsley. She's my hero.
Yeah.
I want to ask her. I want to ask her about. Now, you mentioned painful discipline. I just want to, before she tells us about the college experience.
Oh, okay.
And Ainsley, have you had any painful discipline at home growing up?
Yeah, not me. Of course, not me. I don't think so.
Tell us about your
So.
sisters then.
Yeah, your sister. Yeah,
Sisters for sure.
yeah. And you
You
learn
know,
from you learn from their examples, right?
right. I was technically the youngest here, so I just followed through, and didn't do that. But no, I was just thinking as he was speaking, and as you had made that point about um having a father figure is the first image that you have of God, and having that fear of God is really the beginning of wisdom, as the Bible says. And so I think when us girls growing up, of course, we didn't do everything right, and but we had a healthy respect for dad. And I think the most interesting times was, besides for the punishment that would be involved in whatever we had done or whatever, I think the most significant part for me was knowing that dad was disappointed in me, and that's truly what hurt me the most. And when you have that view of God, when you know I'm disappointing God with my actions, that's, I think, when you start to have that self-discipline for your actions as a person. Um, and I think Alex and Ashton would say the same thing, is, and even with mom, whenever they were disappointed in us, it was the worst. It was worse
Right.
than even the punishment for me.
You know what? That's interesting you said that, because that's exactly how I felt with my mother. And not because she brought the rod on me. That Dad did that some, but you know what? The thought that I would disappoint her, that just, and I know Scott feels
Yeah.
the same way. That just killed me,
Yeah.
and that stayed with me throughout life. As a matter of fact, what does Mom think about this? Mom, of course, is gone for 3 years now, sadly. But well, okay. So Ainsley, let me ask you this question. So just carrying it on to your college years, I know you had some great experiences playing soccer, but you also saw maybe why Johnny, or actually Susie, cannot behave on the soccer field. And I just wonder if you might reflect on some of that, and your thoughts about the lack of discipline, either on the soccer field, or what they grew up with, or the lack of it, what they grew up with.
Oof. I mean,
Where do you start, huh?
yeah, where do you start? I mean, and I had seen this before college, just because our society is going the way it's going. But um, well, actually, I'll say I listened to this. His name is Paul Harvey, and he used to be this radio show host back in the 50s and 60s. I'm sure you guys have heard of him.
Hmm.
And the other day, I was listening to his "If I Were the Devil" um, segment, and everyone should listen to it, because it's quite eye-opening. And even in his day and age, I think he was wise before his times. But there's a part in there where he says, um, if I were the devil and I were to take over a nation, I would subvert the churches first, and I would start a campaign of whispers, as I did in the garden with Eve, and I would say, "Do as you please." And then he goes on later and he says, I would start a rumor, I think is what he says, and uh, or I'd start a rumor, and it would be that man is his own God, and what is evil is good, and what is good is square or weird.
Hmm.
And so I have found, and especially in my soccer career in college, that people just do as they please. They're not scared of discipline. They're not scared of any type of consequence for their actions, because there is none. And I mean, I had so many, especially as a captain, I had so many instances where we would get pulled in as captains, and one of the captains was doing as she pleased. And because our coach did not want to take action for that consequence, we would all get pulled in and we would all have that, stern talking to, and all of us knew who that person was and what their action had been. And instead of turning around after those scenarios and being like, "Hey guys, that's on me, and I'll do better," because there was no discipline, she turned around and be like, "Who ratted me out? And was that you guys?" And instead of being remorseful for that and you know, noticing that
Being
those
accountable.
who are innocent
Hmm.
had to really take the plunge on that one, she couldn't understand that and she instantly got defensive. And so there's just so many things and instances like that where it really opened my eyes to the lack of not only self-discipline but discipline from what they came from. But
Right. That is a good reflection. Well, I remember. Well, you know what? We probably ought to take a break. I'm thinking here, but before we do, when we come back, I remember when Scott and the family lived. Y'all lived in Lorton, Virginia, and I remember that you girls were in the public school just a short period, and Scott was up there seemingly all the time saying, "This is not the way you're going to treat my children." And then you pulled them out and you homeschooled them, and that it has been the best decision, I think, in my view, just one of the best decisions you've ever made. So let's take a break. We'll be right back. We're talking once again, the one and only Ainsley Lockwood. We'll be back in a moment.
Reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and meditating on the Bible are three different activities. Meditation is really looking at a text and applying it to self and saying, how does that apply to me? I'm glad to be able to put these lessons that I've written into a podcast that might help many as you develop the attitude of meditating on the Word. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode.
Looking for a powerful resource to grow your faith and stay grounded in God's Word? Welcome to Lightwave Media Audio. Search thousands of audio files on contemporary issues, timeless truths, and topics that matter to you, all grounded in Scripture. You can explore lessons and sermons from different congregations and speakers. There's always something new to learn and to listen to online anytime. With content from different preachers and teachers, Lightwave Audio connects you to God's Word like never before. Download, listen, and even share your own insights, all for free. Visit lightwavemedia.com/audio today. Discover a world of faith at your fingertips. One of the things that I mentioned as we left, and that was that I remember many years ago, maybe about 17, 18, 20, something like that, Scott Lockwood family was living in Lorton, Virginia, and the girls were all very small, and we went out to visit them in that community. But Scott had just made a momentous decision, or was just making one, and that is the girls were in an elementary public school, and he was going up there on a constant basis saying, "This is not how my children, my girls, are going to be treated, and they're not going to suffer the consequences for other people's behavior in this group sessions or whatever the sessions were." And he pulled them out of the school. He and his wife, Kelly, started homeschooling, and that has been one of the greatest decisions, I think, in that family. So I don't know if you want to just tell us a moment about that, Scott, or Ainsley might. I remember that distinctly, Scott coming into the room, my dad, but whatever. But you might want to start there.
Well, we certainly made that decision because we were almost forced to, as far as I was concerned. And it was interesting if we got Kelly, my wife, on here, because she would say she was the one that was so fearful. She did not want to ruin our kids. We weren't educated enough to educate them. They're gonna fall behind all of their peers. All the fears that people have. Well, what about socialization? This, that, and the other. Well, we finally ended up in that situation where we were in one of the number one school districts in the entire country, Fairfax County. That's all you read about. Oh, they're ranked number one. Oh, they're such an affluent society, and there's three places in the United States that have this, that I guess the demographics of it would make up the most educated people in the nation, and one of them is Washington, D.C., and that surrounding Northern Virginia area, Fairfax County, because of where they work, what they do. So we thought, okay, well, this is going to be second to none. And we went from some charter schools in Colorado that we thought were pretty good, and really filled our purposes because we had a lot of influence, and that every parent was involved in their children's education and cared. That's why charter schools are cheaper, but also more successful. Of course, the unions hate them, but which makes you believe that we should probably be supporting them even more, whether you know anything about them or not. But so we found out what that was. This Fairfax County School was nothing what it was cracked up to be, though. It was chaos. The kids were not disciplined. Nobody was going to discipline them. The girls were taking and being the victims of people, bullying and all of these other things that were happening. But the thing that really bothered me is I sent my children up there who listened to every snap of the finger, and they tried to, like Ainsley said, they didn't want to disappoint me. They were rule followers. They played hard, they worked hard, but they studied hard, and they were just good girls. And then they would get into a classroom that was going chaotic, and the teacher would be like, Johnny can't behave. Everybody put their heads down, their noses down to their desk, and I don't want to hear another thing, and you're going to sit this way for 15 minutes. My girls were in tears. They were like, we don't even know what we did, but we're in trouble. And then they would come home the next day and say, Dad, we were in trouble again today, and we had our faces on our desk for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. So we would go up there to the teacher, and my wife did it a lot more than I did, but we were up there and we'd say, what did Alex and Ainsley do? Well, it wasn't them. I want you to know that. It wasn't them. It was Johnny. And I'm like, you know what? That's the problem. If it's Johnny, get rid of Johnny, take Johnny out, right. Spank his bottom, do whatever you have to do. If my girls are not in trouble, why are they got with their faces in the desk? But that was the mentality because nobody wanted to touch Johnny. Nobody could discipline Johnny. Johnny came from an undisciplined home, and now he's undisciplined in school. And then that's why Johnny's out in the streets when he's 20 shooting the place up. And so we saw that, and it was like, look, our girls can't learn in this environment. They could be talked to. You could be gentle with them, but there was all this screaming, and then the big kids were hitting the little kids, and then it was just chaos. And so we finally decided it was Ainsley's sister, her twin sister, Alex. She says one time, she was too smart for her own good. She says, Mommy, you don't let us go to the restroom by ourselves in a restaurant for 5 minutes, but you leave me up at school for 7 hours by myself, and you're not there with all kind of people. And we kind of looked at each other, and we're like, listen, we'll get back to you on that. Let Mommy and Daddy mull that over. You go to your room. We'll think about that. And, we decided, we thought, you know what? She's right. Why is she up there for hours a day with all these people, not one of them sharing our values? Yeah. And it really came down to something I think, somebody said at a homeschooling seminar where we showed up and found out there were other people like us on the earth. But somebody said, here's the dirty secret of homeschooling. If you just keep your kids out of the public schools, if you don't teach them anything, they'll be better off. Yeah. And you know what? After watching the mess, in the public schools today, I'm determined that's exactly that. You could put a kid out on a farm and he would grow up with a lot more character, may know a little bit less about this or that, some facts, but I'll tell you what, he's going to know the important things of life. You keep him out of the public schools is my advice.
You know what?
That's my advice.
I agree 100%. And I came out of the public school system, but people tell me, well, you're going to have a population that's uneducated, blah, blah, blah. I said, that's what they're putting out right now. That's what is graduating. They can't read their diploma. They're and if you don't have character, if you don't have integrity, then you don't have anything. I don't care what kind of knowledge you have. You just don't have anything. And
Well, and I'm going to say this before I hand it to Ainsley. She'll be able to talk about her experiences and how it prepared her for college and what she saw from the public school system when they got to college and couldn't do anything and they had to help them. All the homeschoolers were like, look, they gave you don't need instruction from the teacher. She told you what she expected, you know. But when I was in the Air Force, we had professors coming in from the Ivy Leagues, and we were dealing with how to train, how to educate adults. This was not conservative people. These weren't members of the church. These weren't Christians. And they were going through the adult learning, I guess, development model. And in the adult development model, there is a stage. It's an immature stage of adult development called socialization. And it is characterized and defined by a person gets their values from their peer group.
that's socialization.
That is socialization. That's the official definition, is they're receiving their values and adopt the values of their peer group. And it's an immature stage. And these professors from Yale and Harvard said, with the PhDs and everything, they said, it's an immature stage, and the closest hypothesis we have is 95% plus of adults in America are stuck in that stage. But they said full adulthood is getting to a point where you decide for yourself, you're a critical thinker, and you base your morals and values on something else, some other kind of ideal, but not your peer group. And when people ask me, well, what about socialization? I'm like, what about socialization? You don't want socialization. That's why yesteryear's farm kids were better off than today's city boys, because they didn't have socialization.
You know what? I want Ainsley to jump in here, but I want you to tell real quickly, Scott. You told me that definition of integrity, and you would go against the grain on that one at the Air Force when you're the commandant there. You said, no, it's not doing what. Tell that how that goes.
Okay, so in the Air Force, integrity is one of the core values, and they're so proud of that, and they should be. Integrity is great, and it's because the kids grow up today, they're not going to receive it, they're not going to learn it, so they get to the Air Force, and just like any other disciplined organization that believes in some conformity and some rules and standards of behavior, it helps a lot of kids. It helped me. It certainly helped me. It was a great thing, but one of their core values they're so proud of is integrity. So I went in and I said, listen, at officer training school, we're gonna do, and they had a mission statement that said we want to be culturally aware, we want to be expeditionary minded, and I'm like, oh my word, what kind of not political nonsense is this for what we're doing for leaders? I said, that's not a mission statement. That's some political statement, political correct thing. So I said, listen, I kept asking my staff, I said, what's important? What's the most important thing? Well, what's the most important thing? And finally, they were saying, character and officers. And I'm like, you know what we're going to do? I said, we'll build leaders of moral character. No, everybody got upset about that. But anyway, that's what we're going to do. So we changed the mission statement. We started going down that road. And they said, well, what's the difference in that and integrity? And I said, well, give me the definition of integrity. So they'd give me the Air Force definition, which is a pretty good illustration. They said, doing the right thing when no one's looking. I thought, you know what, you're right. That's a tough call. No one's looking, but you do the right thing. I said, but let me challenge you and complicate this. What's the right thing? I said, the reason that's challenging in America today is because the right thing has been convoluted to a point where if you do what your peer group expects, or what the right thing is, all your peers think this is right, it may be tough to do if you're wanting to go against it, but it's, you don't want to fall out with your peers. You don't want them to think you're a schmuck. So you're going to do the right thing, meaning that's what your peers expect you to do. I said, now here's a definition of probably a World War II vet that would use on you for moral character. What are you going to do when everyone is looking and they disagree with you? But the right thing is something else. I said, our leader Our nation is in this vacuum of a lack of leadership, of people in the CEOs of corporations, of general officers that are getting fired right and left because they don't have any, real moral character. It's because they do what people expect them to do. They're yes man around the table instead of standing up for what's right. And I'll tell you, this is something Admiral Stockdale said, and I'm going to bring it over from a prisoner of war that was tortured for over 7.5 years. He said, you know what? He said, I think he was talking about maybe integrity itself, but he said, integrity is not, doing and standing up to all of this when you see the light at the end of the tunnel. He said, character is not just hanging in there when you see light at the end of the tunnel. He said, character is doing this when when you see no light at the end of the tunnel.
And doing it anyway.
But you're doing it anyway. And I thought, what a statement.
Yeah.
And the story is in World War II, when the tanks were driving off in Omaha Beach, we lost all of them, but like 2 out of 32 at that particular beachhead. And then one World War II vet was being interviewed at Normandy by a young gal who was a reporter, and she said, well, all these tanks were sinking, and they were supposed to float, but they were sinking, and you guys were rolling them off these landing, off of the amphibious craft, and they were sinking down into the water, and all these guys were going to their watery grave. I mean, it's a terrible story, but an incredible story in leadership in a lot of different ways, but we don't have time right now. I'll tell it in detail later someday, but this one guy was one of the survivors at Omaha Beach with a tank. And she looked at him. She goes, how many tanks went off in front of you? 10. How many sank? All 10. She said, what did you do? He said, I put it in drive and I rolled off. She said, why did you do that? Why did you roll your tank off when you saw all these tanks just sinking? He looked at her as strangely as she looked at him and said, it was my duty to do.
Wow.
We don't understand that at all in this nation right now. We don't even understand that language. We don't understand the word. And in fact, that word was used by Admiral Stockdale when he told that. He was saying, you do it because of duty, not because you see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I know we're getting close to the end of it. We're going to continue with the same topic next time. And we'll have Ainsley back on, and we'll talk with the sons and daughters of Issachar next time on the home, discipline, what's going on in the society with the lack of it in our young people.
Thank you for listening to the Sons of Issachar podcast, hosted by me, Scott Lockwood, and my brother, Bill Lockwood. This show is produced by Lightway Media and John Cackerman. Our theme song is by Alex Grohl. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. You can find us on your favorite music streaming platforms, including Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. If you have time, please share with others and let them know about our show. Find more information and episodes online at lightweightmedia.com/Sons of Issachar.